Hello there, this is Linda Jo Martin, the Book Lady, and this is another completely unrehearsed video from the living room of my home, and I am going to be doing the answers to the Q&A. I posted the Q&A, I think it was the 17th, on St. Patrick's Day, so it's time to do the answers. I got a lot of good questions. Not sure how long this is going to take, but I better get started. So the first one I would like to answer is the one that was asked by both Todd the Librarian and Catalyst Reads. Todd said, I would like to know when you started writing and what writer or person started you down that path. And Catalyst Reads said, who are some of the writers that have inspired you to want to write? So I decided to become a writer right after my divorce in 1985 because I was evaluating what my talents were. And I reasoned that I really had no talents at all whatsoever except that I could write. Therefore, I should be a writer. And from that point on, I had it as a goal to be a writer. And at the time I didn't even have a computer. This was back in 1985, and I reasoned that when the time was right, I would be able to get a computer. So as it turned out, I worked for the county for a few years, and then when I quit that job, I was able to use my retirement pay for the computer that I wanted, which was quite expensive back then compared to now, and not nearly as good. However, I got the computer, and during the ensuing years, I wrote quite a bit, mostly short stories. I wanted to do novels, but I was rather overwhelmed at the prospect for a long time until 2001. That's when I started writing novels. And what are some of the writers that inspired you? Well, two in particular that inspired me are Scott O'Dell, the writer of Island of the Blue Dolphins and Sing Down the Moon. I loved his young adult novels. And the other one that inspired me was John Steinbeck, because he wrote so much about California, which is such a thing for me because I actually lived all my life in California. Up until I was 61 years old, I moved to Idaho, and I've lived here almost 5 years now. So California is where I was born, where I was raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I most recently lived in Happy Camp, California, which is at the very top of the California map, about 20 miles south of the Oregon border, and I lived there for 13 years. And it's sort of a little tiny mountain town in the remote wilderness. So it was mainly while I was living in Happy Camp that I was able to write novels. It was very good for my creativity. So next question. Let's see, Catalyst Reads continues, what were your favorite genres to read when you were in school, and what have been your favorite books you've read this year? Well, my favorite genres in school were mysteries. Of course, I was reading like Nancy Drew, and then biographies. I like to read about famous people like Florence Nightingale and George Washington, and I remember reading a book about Booker T. Washington. Anyhow, I enjoyed biographies when I was very young. Later on, when I was in high school, I liked to read novels. I was reading a lot of Ray Bradbury, science fiction. I was reading horror short stories from Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, and what else? Oh, Kurt Vonnegut Jr. books, Herman Hesse. I read a wonderful epistolary novel called Up the Down Staircase. These are all things I remember reading when I was in high school. Plus the things that were assigned by teachers, like Charles Dickens books. I read David Copperfield and Oliver Twist. I read Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. So I was getting a lot of classics assigned to me when I was in high school. So next question. What have been your favorite books this year? Well, that's a hard one. Well, I enjoyed reading Idaho by Emily Reskovich. It is a literary novel. And I enjoyed Sourdough by Robin Sloan, Gilead by Marilyn Robinson, and I think there's something else that I read recently. Anyhow, those were awesome. Let's see. Catalyst reads, let's go on. Turn the page. Ingrid Fitz says, my question is, did you crochet that beautiful blanket behind you? She says, it is perfect for St. Patrick's Day. I crocheted too and have made many blankets that I give away. I am in Southern California, so how many do I need? Well, that's kind of funny because the person who crocheted that blanket for me lived in Texas, South Texas, and surely she didn't need it either, but she made it for me because she was my mom. She gave that to me either for my birthday or Christmas a few years back. I treasure this. I lost my mom last February, so I like keeping that on the back of my couch to remind me of her and how much she loved me. Now then, Laura Pora asks me, what is the strangest or most interesting inspiration you've had for a story or poem? I really don't have inspirations for poems. I just sit down and write whatever on my mind or whatever I'm feeling or whatever emotional thing I'm going through at the moment. For my stories, I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that and come back to it. Oh, she said, I actually had an idea come to me in a dream once, so I'm curious if that has happened for you. And I have had that happen for a song. I remember waking up in the middle of the night with a dream, having heard something in a dream, and I had to immediately go record it so that I wouldn't forget the melody and write some words that go with it. So I have had that happen for a song, but not for a novel or a story. Do you have a favorite scent? I don't really. I like things like peppermint and banana scent and fresh baked bread is awesome. And I like the way babies smell. Their heads smell amazing when they're newborns. Can't get that scent anywhere else. So. Just checking, looking through the comments. Okay, here's one. This is Donna Jones. She asks, I love your bullet journal. The daisies are beautiful. My two questions are, what state do you live in? And may I ask how old you are? So the answer is that right now I am living in Idaho, northern Idaho. I live up near Lake Coeur d'Alene, in between Coeur d'Alene and Spokane, Washington. And I am 65 years old right now. I will be having a birthday very soon now in the middle of the summer. So I won't be 65 much longer. That reminds me of a story. Might as well tell it now. My hair used to be a lot longer when I first moved up here to Idaho. And I went to a church, not the one I usually go to, but another one where my friend was going to church. And I was standing in their community room after the service, and a little boy walked up to me, and his eyes got really big, and he said, "You are really old." And I thought that was really funny. I said to him, "Yes, you're right, I'm really old." And then he said, "Well, you have a lot of gray hair." And I said, "Yes, and I earned all of these gray hairs. I am so glad to have these gray hairs." And the father, of course, was kind of embarrassed, but I thought it was really funny. And here's the last one. This is Mrs. Shippert's library. She asked, "Have you always lived in northern Idaho? Does your family come from Idaho? What kind of work do you do? I know you are a new Christian, and what set you on that path?" Well, no, I've lived most of my life in California, Northern California, and my family does not come from Idaho, although I did come here because one of my daughters was living in the area at the time, and the kind of work that I'm doing right now, I earn my money from a couple of different sources. One from writing articles and blog posts on the internet, and the other thing that I'm doing for money right now is transcription. I do not like doing the transcription very much. It's very time consuming. The blogging is a long time thing. I've been doing it for many years, let's say since at least 2001. And so that's kind of second nature to me. But yeah, in the past I've been a county worker in the welfare department, and I have worked, I've owned my own web design business, and I've worked in editing for a newspaper, an online newspaper. And she says, "I know you are a new Christian. What set you on that path?" That's a long story. So when I was about 5, maybe 7 years old, my grandmother sent me to Sunday school a couple of times behind my mother's back. My mother and father were not at all into being Christians or any other religion, and they wanted all of their children to decide for themselves what they were going to do as far as spirituality goes. And I have to say my parents were always very supportive no matter what we chose. So when I was about 7, I'd say my grandmother sent me to Sunday school a couple of times, and it didn't really make too big of an impression on me. But when I got home from staying with my grandmother, I decided I was going to try to sing that song that I had heard in Sunday school, and it was "Jesus Loves Me," and I was trying to remember the words. And it was at that time that I first felt the love of Jesus. And that's the first encounter. And then I was raised agnostic, really, and didn't have a religion. I got involved with a cult religion when I was 17. I don't want to state which religion it was because I don't want to give it any publicity. And I was in that religion for 30 years, and I was pretty much miserable most of the time. And then I left the religion because of prophecies unfulfilled. And that was about the year 2000. And from that time until 2013, I was what I called a label-less believer, because I believed in God, but I didn't want any labels on me. I didn't want any religious affiliations of any kind. I was kind of a person who was looking into a lot of different religions, sort of like New Age, except there was a lot of things about the New Age thing that I didn't believe, like reincarnation. But I was looking into Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism and things like that. Lots of isms and other things, more New Agey, but wasn't committing to anything. And then I moved here to Idaho, and I was having a very difficult time. I actually was escaping from a bad relationship. Right before I left him, he threatened to kill me, and I was going through a lot emotionally. So I came to Idaho. I was having a difficult time. I left my car and my van behind in Happy Camp and having to walk everywhere. And so one day I walked into town, and on the way back I started getting heat exhaustion, and I was very concerned about my health. So I happened to look up and I saw a sign on a building that said coffee. It said coffee and church or chapel. So I thought maybe it was a Christian coffee house sort of thing, because I had seen something like that before when I lived in Siskiyou County in Mount Shasta. There was a coffee house owned by Christians. So I went into the coffee house, and lucky for me, they were open, and a very nice young lady made me a mocha, and it was like half the price of what they had cost me in Happy Camp, and I was so thrilled. And I sat down and I cooled off and got ready for the rest of the walk home. So that was pretty much what led up to it, and I asked her about the church. So the next Sunday I walked back down to the church, and on the way down there I kept hearing that inaudible voice, and it kept telling me that today would be a good day to give my life to Jesus. So that is what I did, following that inner prompting, and I have been committed to being a Christian ever since. So that is the end of my Q&A. I didn't expect it to end up with a testimony, but there it was. So thank you all very much for the questions. The only one I didn't answer was the one Laura had for me. So I'm going to go back to that. Laura said, what is the strangest or most interesting inspiration you've had for a story or poem? You know, I've had so many strange inspirations for stories, and it seems like most of them aren't getting written. It's one thing to have the inspiration, and it's another thing to do the writing. So I do a lot of short fiction with odd inspirations. But my novels, I would not say are really that odd. Most of them are historical or young adult. Yes, I'm a young adult author. And so if I ever come up with a good answer to that question, I'll let you know. Thanks a lot, everyone, for asking me the questions, and I'll talk to you in another video. Bye.